Good day. I want to welcome all our St. John Paul II parishioners and all our guests who have joined us in viewing this video reflection. I am Father Mike Ignashuk, pastor of St. John Paul II Parish on the south side of Milwaukee. In the Gospel for this coming Sunday, we hear several parables from Jesus, and we hear St. Matthew explain one of them, putting his words in Jesus' mouth. It is interesting, however, to consider our reaction to the parables in answer to a simple question. If God is the sower of the seed in these parables, who is the woman who kneads the yeast into the dough? The answer is, of course, God. This is one of the times when, in Jesus' own words, we find a feminine image of God. Because of our culture, we are programmed to think of God only in masculine terms. And yet, here we plainly have Jesus comparing God to a woman and her skills at baking. God is the one who gives increase to the kingdom, just as through the perfectly timed periods of kneading and resting, a woman brings a mass of dough to rise and turns wheat and water into bread. This same hesitancy to think of God portrayed as a woman happens in St. Luke's Gospel, as we read first the parable of the lost sheep on the hillside and easily identify the shepherd with God. But immediately following, we hear the parable of the lost coin, and somehow we never see God as the woman who searches her whole house to find that missing coin. Without going into the possible reasons for why we rarely recognize these feminine images of God, this week I invite you to ponder the possibilities of traditionally feminine roles that are part of what we ascribe to God, to the God that Jesus taught us about. We will always call God our Father, but that does not stop us from also considering that God mothers us as well. Mothers give us birth. God gives us life. They nurture and feed us. God is the source of true nourishment, and all that we eat is really His gift. Mothers protect us, especially as children. Jesus, later in Matthew's Gospel and in the Gospel according to St. Luke, compares God to a mother hen who gathers her chicks under her wings to protect them. We constantly pray for God's protection and for Him to watch over us. Perhaps after praying with these images, you can give thanks to God for the women in your life: mothers, grandmothers, godmothers, sisters, and all who have nurtured us and embodied their love, the all-encompassing love of God. We can also learn from this parable that process that describes the process of kneading yeast into dough to bring it to life. Kneading is both hard work and a somewhat stressful process. It takes strength and patience to knead dough properly. The dough is stretched and punched down. Then it is allowed to rise while it is gently warmed, only to have this process repeated, further stretching and kneading. All the while, the mass of dough rises and grows into something very different and full of nourishment. This is an analogy for how God's grace works in our lives, sometimes challenging and stretching us so that we feel deflated or even punched down. And yet God's care warms our souls to new life and causes us to grow. This process is repeated in our spiritual lives as well, bringing us to growth and not only nourishing our hearts, but allowing us to become nourishing to others. Perhaps we can reflect on this time of COVID-19 and the pandemic as a time of needing taking place in our world. We certainly can feel punched down by our isolation and the continued restrictions placed upon us. Perhaps God's grace might be working in our world, bringing us through all this hardship to a time of new growth and grace. It has happened before. After the plagues that caused Western civilization to falter and backstep in the Middle Ages, the Renaissance dawned and a new age of insight and learning happened. God did not cause those plagues, and God did not send us the COVID-19 virus. But God can use these hardships to knead our souls and our world into a time ripe for rediscovering not only God, but the values of justice and equality. As throughout this world we recognize one another's sufferings because of this virus. That is the message of the cross. No matter what happens, God's grace can conquer and bring new life and growth. God is patient and persistent, as a woman needs to be in order to turn a mass of dough into bread. For that persistence and patience with our stubbornness, we give God thanks. Please stay safe, stay healthy, and know that we are truly blessed. I remain your pastor, Father Mike.